against them at the time.
All right. Now, you in your statement, you pointed out that in the board meeting, board pack of December 2019, it was reported to the Burswood Limited Board that the CBA and Riverbank Investments had been closed, or was going to be closed by CBA. You obviously mentioned that in your statement. Did that have any meaning to you, or do you recall reading it at the time and having any significance to you then?
It had no significance to me then. Looking at it subsequently, it didn't jump out to me. I can't remember that it was a discussion point in the board meeting of, was it August or December 2020? 19, sorry. So unfortunately I can't put any light on the Riverbank investment account.
Do you recall having any reaction at all to an indication that an account was being closed by a bank?
No, and even looking at it today, I don't know that one line at that time of my tenure would have grabbed my attention. I'd have probably thought it's a compliance matter that they need to report it. Unfortunately, I can't give you any other answer to that.
If the CBA Bank had given an indication to the management of Crown Perth that the reason they were closing it was in connection with concerns about possible money laundering, is that something you expect would have been raised with you as a member of the Burswood Board?
Absolutely, and I would have expected that as part of the board report there would have been an extra sentence to that effect.
When the Bergen inquiry was taking place, were you following that closely at the time?
Not closely, not online. I did daily try and catch up on the media articles written by it.
Did you become aware of the examination of Mr. Preston around the Riverbank Investments accounts around the middle of last year?
I did. I don't know if it was in the middle of last year, but it was through the Bergen report that I did become aware of the Riverbank investment.
And the closure in 2014 by ANZ and then closure by CBA in 2019. Now, were those matters that having been raised in the context of the publicity of the Bergen inquiry, were they then brought to the attention on the board of Burswood Limited in the middle of last year?
I think those matters are a lot of matters you'd read are labelled or has the word historical in it. It was most definitely not raised as an issue. I asked Mr. Bossy about it. From my correct recollection on the conversation I had with Mr. Bossy, which was a face-to-face conversation, he was also unaware of the Riverbank Investment Limited account. The Treasury function sits at the parent company. I've not been in meetings where those matters have been discussed.
Did you become aware at all around in the middle of last year that Mr. Preston and Mr. Stokes had written to Austrac related to some historical activity on the Riverbank accounts?
I know there are reports of, and I think if you look at those and from memory, it's written to Austrac where they were reviewing it, haven't heard back. It is now an ongoing point where there's obviously the reviews, a look-back review being done. However, there's not been, that I know of, any final report that have come out.
All right. Were you made aware at the Burswood Limited meetings by Mr. Preston or anyone else about the nature of what he, or under his supervision, had uncovered about the way in which there'd been a lack of reporting on certain transactions on the Riverbank Investments accounts?
I can't remember any conversation with Mr. Preston in the Riverbank investment account.
Did he raise it at all during any of the meetings of Burswood Limited?
I can't remember any conversation or raised issue.
When you say you can't remember, are you saying you positively do not remember, as in it didn't happen, or you are unsure whether it may or may
I
not?
just don't believe it happened.
Let's be very clear about this. Don't believe is different to a concrete understanding it didn't take place.
I have no recollection that there was a conversation at the Burswood Limited board meeting about the nature or concerns in the Riverbank investment account.
Now, is it your expectation that if some unusual activity on the Riverbank investment account had been uncovered, even historically or subsequently, that it would have been reported, should have been reported to the Burswood Limited board?
I believe it should be reported to the Burswood Limited board.
Now, do you consider that as a director of Burswood Limited, you owed a duty to that company to consider and investigate the veracity of the allegations made during 2019, independently from the Board of Crown Resorts?
My answer is yes. The Bergen report only came out in, I don't know, February 2021. Obviously raised quite a lot of concern with me, and I think my actions speak to that since the end of 2020 and through 2021.
So taking the position as it stands today, where we have the benefit of the Bergen report, and do you consider that Burswood Limited itself has a responsibility to ensure that a proper review is undertaken of Perth casino operations to ascertain the full extent of any historical money laundering that may have taken place?
Yes.
And as part of that review, would you expect that any individuals who were responsible for failings in that process to be identified?
Yes.
And would you expect there to be disciplinary proceedings potentially taken against them if they were at fault?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned in your statement, and again a short time ago, that you had a conversation with Mr. Bossy about the Riverbank account. And if I could take you to your statement at page 20. And I think it's page 20. I may have got that reference incorrect. No, sorry. It starts on 19. It's topic 39, and then over the page you describe a little what we've been dealing with, and you, in the second major paragraph, starting shortly after, you make reference to a conversation with Mr. Bossy.
Sorry, where are we?
So we're in Ms. Fuster's statement at page, it's FEW .0001, .0001, .0020.
Yes.
And that page, yes, so the bottom of page 19 is where the topic is, and then we start over a page on 20 in the second major paragraph. And you make reference to a conversation with Mr. Bossy, and I think you said that earlier today as well. Now, I would like, if you can, for you to be as specific as you can about that conversation and what you said to him. when conversation took place and precisely what words he said in response.
So the conversation took place at TWR, which is a bar at Crown Towers. After the Bergen report was released, where I said to Mr. Bossy, I'm surprised with this. Do you know anything about this Riverbank account? Because I think Miss Manos made a statement of was she expected to be on her knees going through bank statements or whatever. So I said,
I beg your pardon,
Miss Manos made a statement in the Bergen inquiry, something along the lines of were people expecting her to be on her knees going through bank statements to see what's happening in the account. I said, do we know what's happening with that? And Mr. Bossy was very clear to me that he does not have access or manage or see any of the bank accounts. That is part of the finance function. That is a centralised function that has local representation in Perth. Also that the bank account was closed in 19 and that obviously was used as part of the VIP program, which is a program everybody has been very clear with me on is completely run, managed and conducted out of Crown Melbourne.
When you say VIP program, just so I understand what you're talking about, this is the very important person program for international business, essentially.
Correct.
And is it your understanding that the Riverbank Investments account was operated in connection with the VIP program?
Correct.
Now, did you ask Mr. Bossy any questions about who did have authority to operate the Riverbank Investments account in Crown Perth?
Not in Crown Perth. I didn't ask the specific person in Crown Perth, but we did discuss that the responsibility is with the CFO.
And who was that at the material time? Do you know?
At the material time would have been Mr. Barton, I believe.
Okay.
I could be corrected, but I believe at that time it was Mr. Barton.
So, again, I just want you to be very as clear as you can in your recollection of what Mr. Bossy said to you about his knowledge of the Riverbank Investments account.
Hey, I remember him having a shock on his face going, I didn't know about the Riverbank investment account either. So I got I didn't feel I got resistance from Mr. Bossy on it or he was trying to talk it right. He seemed to have been as surprised as I was.
Okay. Could I ask you to turn now to a slightly different, well, quite a different topic really, and to some of the topics we have referred you to, I've mentioned a little earlier, harm minimisation aspects of casino operations. And I think you have said, you've described in the centralised function of a responsible gambling framework, essentially of Crown Resorts. Having regard to the evidence you have already given, I may already know the answers to many of these questions, but I'd ask you to go to your statement at page 23 under topic 51. and you may recall there were a series of topics, and they start at 45 and end over the page at 57, and they're primarily directed to your knowledge as it related to Burswood nominees and its involvement with problem gambling and electronic gaming machines. And it may be because the topics were directed to Burswood nominees and not to Burswood Limited.
Mm.
I'm interested in what the answer to, or what your explanation would be for 51 if we were referring there to Burswood Limited.
I think if it was Burswood Limited, my answer would be the oversight is as much as the update from Mr. Rossi on the financial performance of the electronic gaming machine business.
So there were occasions, were there not, when reports came to the Burswood Limited meeting from the CEO that explained developments that were taking place at Crown Casino, the Perth Casino, in terms of additional games that were to be played.
Yes.
And do you recall in one period there was a change in the speed of the games?
And right, yes.
From 5 seconds to 3. So there were, and he was reporting to the board of what had been the outcome of applications to the Gaming and Wagering Commission and what that meant, what the implications were financially for Burswood Limited or the Crown Perth.
I can't remember that there's been a report on what the financial implications of it was. I do remember new games being purchased. I do remember the 5 to 3 and now 3.5 second spin rate, and that the GWC approved that, and that the trial with that started. I'm not exactly sure I can recall the financial impact of that.
Okay, it wasn't really the focus of my question. It was more about whether you were being reported to. The reports were being received from the management of Crown Perth as regarding new games and effectively what they were doing, what they were. Now, is it the case, in answer to the same question, if it were Burswood Limited, it was not exercising any oversight as to the structure and operation of the EGM business at the Perth Casino? It's another example of you've been noting what has already been decided and done.
Yes, it was. There was no collaboration meeting or strategy session where we decided one of the strategies would be to do that. It was pretty much a fait accompli. It's happening.
And stepping into the Western Australian context for a moment and looking at the harm minimisation to the public of Western Australia, in your mind at least, was any consideration given to the possible impacts from a harm from gaming associated with the introduction of new EGMs to the Perth Casino?
Not that I can recall, no.
Is it something about which you are now aware and would consider to be something Burswood Limited should take into account?
I think that is very important. I think there needs to be a great balance between providing that and what it does to people, and the responsible gaming program is extremely important as a mitigating factor in assisting people that have a problem.
Yes, what I'm focusing on here is cause and effect. So if you take, for example, the responsible gambling program,
Yes.
that's a remediation. It's after someone has already got a problem or may have a problem. So we're looking at how you manage people who effectively are unable, for whatever reason, to control their gambling habits. But there's a cause and effect aspect to that, which is in terms of the types of games that are offered at a casino. In other words, the more addictive the game is, the more likely it is that a person will develop an addiction. Do you accept that as a proposition?
Yes.
So in terms of the design of games and the introduction of new games to Perth Casino, is it your view that Burswood Limited has a role to play in minimising the harm caused by introduction of new games?
Absolutely.
And is it your view that a decision needs to be made and a balance struck between the financial implications of that and the public harm aspects?
Yes.
And in your view, who should be setting the risk appetite, if I could use that expression, for that kind of balancing act?
Well, in my world, it would be the Burswood Limited Board.
And it would be Burswood Limited for the reasons you have already said, I presume, that it ought to be...
It's a licence issued, yeah. It's a community we look after in Western Australia. It's the responsibility of Western Australian company to run this in the best interest of the people of Western Australia.
Okay, now, on that topic, in your statement, you have made reference this is on page 7, under the topic 7, to having received certain documents at the time of your appointment. Some of these, at least, you've not attached to your statement, but I'd like, if I may, to take you to a document which is PUB.0026.0002.001, which is the Constitution of Burswood Limited. And I'd just ask if you could, you should have been given notice of this document before today, but to familiarise yourself with it and confirm it's the document you are referring to in Roman 2 of that part of your statement. If you
Yes,
need,
I'm
Yes.
happy that I've got a copy of the Constitution.
Now, could I draw your attention to Article 3.12 of that document, which is on page bear with me.
It's there.
Oh, is it? Well done. One step ahead of me, thank you. Now, I'm not going to ask you to interpret that article, but I do wish to ask you some questions about your understanding of the current position of Burswood Limited. I think you've said, Mr. Bossy, the CEO of Crown Perth, reports to Mr. McCann, the CEO of Crown Resorts, and otherwise directly to the Crown Resorts Limited Board.
Correct.
Risk management strategy and policy is centralised and determined by Crown Resorts.
Correct.
The AML CTF programs and policy is centralised and determined by Crown Resorts.
Yes.
Responsible gambling policy is centralised and determined by Crown Resorts.
Yes.
And would it be fair to say, and you can disagree with this proposition if you wish, that the central management and control of Crown Resorts Limited is not located in Western Australia?
Correct.
Sorry, I misphrased that. Burswood Limited is not located
Correct.
in Western Australia. Now, can I also draw your attention to another article, which is Article 3.20. To your knowledge, has a member of the, I'm going to call it the GWC, you'll know who I'm referring to, the Gaming Wagering Commission of Western Australia, attended any meeting of directors of Burswood Limited?
No,
To your knowledge, are you aware of any member of the GWC having received notice of a directors' meeting?
no.
Now, in your statement on page 14, you might recall there was a topic concerning the agreement between Crown Melbourne and the Victorian Commission for Gambling and Liquor Regulation, and some particular clauses of that. And I think you've said that you were not aware of that provision and became aware of it more recently. I just want you to cast your mind back to whether at any time during the period that you've been a director of Burswood Limited, you became aware of or had knowledge of that agreement and those clauses before the Victorian Royal Commission commenced.
No, I didn't.
Okay, now, if I could ask you to turn to topic 63, and it's on page 27 of your statement. And you've, in response to a topic dealing with personal relationships between employees and officers of Crown Group and the GWC, you've made reference to becoming aware through media publications of a relationship between Mr. Connolly, who was the Chief Casino Officer, and Mr. Paul Hume and Mr. Claude Murray. Do you know of have you met Mr. Hume and Mr. Murray? You understand what their roles are in the Crown Perth management structure?
Yeah, I met Mr. Hume once. I believe once. I've met Mr. Murray a couple of 3 or 4 times.
And to the best of your knowledge, do they remain employees of the called Crown Perth?
I don't know if Mr. Hume is still an employee of Crown Perth. Sorry, that's Mr. Murray definitely is.
All right. Now at the Burswood Limited meeting in April or in June, was the nature of any relationships between employees of, I'm going to use Crown Perth as the entity, and the GWC discussed?
Sorry, Mr. Futrell, can you just ask me the start of the question? I just didn't hear what period?
At either of the meetings this year that you've
Yeah.
attended, April or June, was there any discussion around the media allegation, or what had been raised in the media concerning the relationship between Mr. Connolly and those
No.
two people? Is it of interest or concern to you as a director of Burswood Limited to understand the nature of any relationships that might exist between employees of Crown Perth and the regulator, GWC?
That is of interest. I did raise, I think I said in here actually, when I read the article, I have raised this with Mr. Bossy at the time that the article came out. Mr. Bossy confirmed to me that the Director General at the was it Mr. Ord at the time was fully aware of the relationship. It was a fully declared relationship, and there was no concern about it.
Was that enough to satisfy your inquiry?
I think subsequent matters to people being removed has clearly clearly shown that that there could have been a perceived conflict of interest.
Well, one of the documents you were provided, I think, when you joined the board was a Crown Resorts Limited Code of Conduct for directors. Are you aware of any existence of any code of conduct that applies to employees and managers?
Am I aware of the policy?
Yes.
Yeah, I am.
And is there, given the public nature of the information, is it your view that there ought to be an internal investigation, inquiry into the nature of any relationship between Mr. Connolly and those individuals?
Yes, if yes.
And so what if any steps have, what if any steps have been taken by you to put that into effect?
I've not taken any steps to put that into effect. I discussed it with Ms. Bossy, satisfied myself that the relationship was declared prior or as these people were working together, and that all parties were comfortable with that.
Is that a convenient time?
Yes, it is. And Ms. Fuster will resume at 2 p.m.
Yeah.